Mentioned this morning that we would be looking at Psalm 14, and I hope that you've had time this afternoon to read through those 7 verses and perhaps even go a little further and look at Psalm 53. So I encourage you to get your Bible open to the 14th Psalm. That's where we'll be spending our time. We'll make some reference to the 53rd Psalm, but our focal point will be Psalm 14. We are all familiar with at least the first verse, which says, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." And if I were to quote that and not give you the reference, you may know that that was in Psalm 14, or at least you know that's a line in one of the Psalms. We may not be as familiar, though, with all that is found or implied in that psalm. We're familiar with that phrase. The fool has said, there is no God. We may not be aware that it's essentially repeated again in Psalm 53. So when you read quickly through Psalm 14 and you jump over to Psalm 53, you say that's the same psalm. Almost the same psalm. Not exactly, and we'll see those discrepancies in a moment. We may be more familiar than we are with Psalm 14 and Psalm 15 with Paul's use of it in Romans chapter 3 in verses 10 through 12, where he quotes a portion of the psalm. Didn't quote the whole psalm, but a portion of the psalm. And the point to be made in Romans chapter 3 is, this is evidence that all have sinned. We have before concluded that all are under sin, he said at verse 9. Then at verse 10 he quotes from this psalm, which deals with the corruption of man. There are several things to be learned from this psalm. We're going to see the connection between one's belief and how he lives. That's one of the main things we want to see in our study tonight. There is a direct connection between what one believes or does not believe and how they conduct their lives. Secondly, we're going to see the corruption of mankind, not just of one person or one particular person, but the corruption of mankind. We're going to see that in this psalm, and that's how it was used, as Paul quoted it in Romans chapter 3. We're going to see a conflict between those who are corrupt, using the language of Psalm 14:1, and those who are righteous. So those who are corrupt and those who are righteous, there's a conflict between them. And that's part of the point of the psalm, is we're going to get to that. And then we're going to see also the blessing and the comfort of God's people. And so you say, well, this is an interesting psalm maybe that talks about the fool has said there is no God, but there's more than that to this psalm. There's going to be some encouragement here to those who are the people of God. So let's read the psalm. If you haven't had a chance, this is your chance to catch up by our reading of the psalm. Beginning at verse 1, Psalm 14. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. They have all turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is none who does good. No, not one. Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge? Who eat up my people as they eat bread? Who do not call on the Lord? There they are in great fear. For God is with the generation of the righteous. You shame the counsel of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. Oh, that salvation of Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord brings back the captivity of his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. That's the psalm, only 7 verses. Let's focus on the one who says there is no God. The passage begins and opens with that phrase, the fool has said, there is no God. 3 things we're going to consider. We're going to look at the psalm. We're going to look at the connection. You'll see what the connection is when we get there. And then we're going to look at the lessons that we learned from the psalm. So let's analyze the psalm for a little bit. Let's focus on the psalm itself. There are 2 psalms that seem to be twin psalms, Psalm 14 and Psalm 53. And so if you want to take a moment and open your Bible or jump over there to Psalm 53, just take a quick glance of Psalm 53, and you say, well, that's Psalm 14 basically repeated. And so we raise the question, why the same psalm given again in Psalm 53? The basic and bottom line answer is, we're not sure. Various scholars have ventured out to give their explanation, but when they get through with that, there is conjecture, and we really do not know why there are two Psalms. They are in separate books. And you remember when I say books, you say, well, there's just one book of Psalm. Well, actually, the book of Psalms is in 5 books. And so there were 5 books, that is, these songs or psalms were divided into books or collected in books. And so Psalm 14 is in the first book of Psalms, and Psalm 53 is in the second. So they were in separate books. And it'd be somewhat like we might have a song. We wouldn't have Amazing Grace in our hymnal on page 2, and then over on page 15 have that exact same song. But we might have it in 2 different song books. And so much the same here. Perhaps it's the same principle found in verses 1 to 5, and you'll see what I mean by principle. The same basic elements in principle are adapted to a new or a different circumstance to be used in another song book, as it is listed in the second book, in Psalm 53. Now, they do differ slightly. And so let's see wherein they differ. They don't differ in verses 1 to 4, but verse 5, and so why is there a difference in the number of verses? Well, verse 5 in Psalm 53 encompasses what we find in 2 verses in Psalm 14. So wherein are they the same? Well, they're the same up to this point, almost identical wording. But at Psalm 14, there they are in great fear. We see the same thing in Psalm 53. There they are in great fear. Psalm 53 adds where no fear was. Now we'll come back to that a little bit later. For God is with the generation of the righteous. But over here it words it, for God has scattered the bones of him who encamps against you. Is that saying something very similar, but they differ. Then over here we have, you shame the counsel of the poor. Over there you put them to shame. But the Lord is his refuge because God has despised them. No, that's not exactly the same thing. They're not contradictory. It is adapted and some things have changed. There's all kinds of various speculation that though the one who wrote Psalm 53, they both are attributed to David, that someone took that psalm and altered it and thought this was more the original form. We have no evidence of that and nothing that we can do to prove that. So let's talk more about the point of the psalm. I'm just trying to illustrate, though, first of all, that they do differ just a little bit. What is the point of the psalm, whether you're talking about Psalm 14 or Psalm 53? The point of the psalm is the wicked condition of the human race. Notice at verse 1, they are corrupt. Now, there's more to be said about that. In fact, he expands upon that. But the fact he says they are corrupt is a declaration of the condition of mankind. The psalm deals with the relationship between God and corrupt man. And what we're going to see in the psalm is God takes note of man, both the righteous and the wicked. God takes note of the wicked and what he does. God's well aware of that. God's also taking note of the righteous and what he does. God's well aware of that. But the psalm also points out to us that corrupt man ignores God. The corrupt man has said, the fool has said, there is no God. And God, as we saw in Psalm 10, is in none of his thoughts. The psalm consists of 2 stanzas. Keep in mind, as we study the Psalms, quite often we may forget as we're reading these that these were actually songs. And as our songs are, there are stanzas. And so we have 2 stanzas. Verses 1 through 3 focuses on the corruption. Here is an appraisal of the human race. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that does good. We'll come back to those phrases in just a moment. And so it is an appraisal of mankind, the corruption of man. The second stanza, verses 4 to 7, some think 4 to 6, and then verse 7 is a conclusion. But I group verse 7 in with that it is dealing with the conflict of those who are corrupt versus those who are righteous. Those who are corrupt mistreat the righteous, but the righteous have God as their refuge. We're going to see all of that here in just a moment. So let's do an analysis of the psalm now. Let's work our way through the psalm. We're not going to comment on every phrase, every word, but let's just get a gist of what the psalm is saying in each stanza. So let's talk about the first stanza now. The first stanza deals with the corruption. Here is an appraisal of the human race. But before he does that, before he gets to the human race as a whole, he says at verse 1a, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And so the fool says there is no God. Literally no God, the fool says. The other part of this first stanza is, They live corrupt because they've said there is no God. And so that's the point. Now we're going to analyze that a little more, but get those 2 points. The fool has said there is no God, so therefore he lives corrupt. Corruption comes, and there is a connection with the idea that there is no God. Now what does he say about them? He uses this word corrupt. Lang suggests that the word corrupt gives the idea of being spoiled or being soured as of milk. And so it's not that they are corrupt in the sense that they are different. The fool has said there's no God, and he differs a little bit. Putting it on the analogy of milk, you might have one glass of milk and another glass of milk, and one has a little different flavor or a little different taste. It's not a different taste or a different flavor. This over here is spoiled, and it's ruined, and it's corrupt in that sense. And so it's absolutely soured. And so the fool has said there is no God, and so they are corrupt in the sense they have become soured. Now notice at verse 1, their works are abominable. That tells me they're willing to go far in their actions that are corrupt. It's not that the fool says there's no God, but he doesn't really corrupt him that bad. He's just a little bit sour. He goes far in his corruption. His works are abominable. Then the text moves from the fool himself seemingly to the whole of mankind in all of this. When he said the fool has said there is no God, they are corrupt. And they have done abominable works, and there is none who does good. He is encompassing the whole of mankind. The whole of mankind is the one that indeed looks that he has done no good. Now look at verse 2. The Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there's any who understand and who seek God. And so he's saying they're corrupt, and so they have no understanding. That reminds us of Proverbs chapter 1 and in verse 7, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of understanding or knowledge. So when I have an understanding and wisdom concerning who God is, that leads to knowledge and wisdom. They have no wisdom, they have no understanding. Now furthermore at verse 2, God looked to see if there were any who understood. Now notice the phrase, who seek God. The fool is corrupt because he doesn't seek God at all. He's not interested in God. And there's more about that in just a moment. But he's not interested in what God said. God is indeed in none of his thoughts. It's interesting, the English Standard, American Standard say the same thing. He doesn't seek after God. He doesn't look after. He's not interested in what God wants. He's not interested in what God says. He's not interested at all in any instructions that God may give. The Lexham English Bible uses this phrase. God looked down to see if there were any who care about God. Are there any people who begin to even care about who God is and what he wants and what his rules have to say? By the way, this seeking God is equated in this psalm with understanding. One who has understanding and wisdom will seek after God. We see that in this context. So the first stanza deals with corruption. Now then the second stanza carries us from verse 4 to verse 7. That's the end of the psalm, deals with this conflict between those who are corrupt that have been just described in verses 1 to 3, the first stanza, and those who are righteous. What is this conflict? Well, first of all, you would expect in reading the psalm, if this is your first reading of that, and you read through verse 3 and you say, now I'm ready for the second stanza, what you would expect is a statement about divine punishment. Because here we're seeing that man is a fool and he looks to God, or doesn't look to God at all. He doesn't seek understanding and wisdom from God, and he acts corruptly. And what you would expect is now divine punishment is coming. Well, that may be implied, and it is. But that's not what this psalm does. It shows a contrast. There are three things I want you to see here. First of all, notice at verse 4. It talks about what they have. What those who are corrupt have, they have no knowledge. Look at verse 4. Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge? Do all the workers of iniquity, those who are corrupt, do they have no knowledge, no wisdom, no understanding? What they have is no knowledge. It doesn't mean they're not smart. It just means they don't have knowledge. The knowledge of God, the wisdom of God. Now verses 4 through 6 talk about what they do. I know what they have no knowledge. What do those who are corrupt do? Well, look at verse 4. Who eat up my people as they eat bread. Just as one would take bread and consume it and crumble the bread, they're eating up my people. They're destroying my people. They seek to oppress my people. Those who are corrupt have no use for those who are righteous. We'll see more about that in verse 6. So they eat up the children like they eat bread. Verse 4 says they do not call upon God. That's an expression to refer to obedience unto God. They do not submit themselves unto God. Why? Because they think there's no God. Verse 1. So verse 4 said they do not call upon the Lord. Now notice here's an interesting phrase at verse 6. You shame the counsel of the poor. What is that talking about? They shame the counsel, or some translations say the plans of the poor. The poor is those who are righteous. They hold the plans or the counsel of the righteous, what guides them and what rules them, the direction of God, in other words, the instructions of God, the wisdom that comes from God. They hold it in contempt and in ridicule because all of that counsel rests itself in God. That's why they have no use for it. And so the fool looks at you, the one who says there's no God, and they want to know why you do what you do. And you say, well, because God told me in His Word, and they ridicule that. That is so absurd. And so they shame the counsel or the plans of the poor. That's what they do. Now there's a third thing I want you to see, and that is what they experience. Look at verse 5. They are in great fear. What they experience is fear. It doesn't mean at all times, but at some point, the fool finally comes to experience fear when he begins to see the condition that he indeed is in. Psalm 53 adds this, and this is the value of looking at the two Psalms. Psalm 53 said, there they are in fear where no fear was. Now that's interesting. Some suggested that's panic fear, where the fool is pressing on, but at some point, it may be before his life over, he comes to the point he's in panic fear because there was no fear in his life, but all of a sudden, where no fear was, there's suddenly fear. And that's going to be put in contrast with the right. Now here's the contrast we just saw. And this is what the psalm does. The first stanza said, the fool says there's no God and he lives corruptly. The second stanza showing this contrast between the corrupt and the righteous. The corrupt have no knowledge. They oppress the righteous and they are ultimately in fear. But the righteous are those that God is with those who are righteous. Let's go back to verse 5. We haven't talked about that. Look at verse 5. There they are in great fear, for God is with the generation of the righteous. God is not with those who are wicked, but God is with the righteous. Furthermore, God is the refuge. You shame the counsel of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. They may be ridiculed, they may be made fun of, they may be shut down, but they run to God for their refuge. We'll talk more about God being our refuge in a moment. Then verse 7, oh, that salvation would come out of Zion when the Lord brings back the captivity of his people, and let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. What I'm learning from that is God will deliver his people. So what a contrast. The righteous, God is with them. God is their refuge. He will deliver his people. The corrupt have no knowledge. They are oppressing the righteous, and they ultimately stand in fear. So that's part of the point of the psalm. And so what we've seen is two stanzas. What did the first stanza say? If we were singing this as a song, you want to get the message from the song. And so what was the first stanza saying? It was saying, the fool says there's no God, and they live corruptly. And now let's sing the second stanza. The second stanza says that there is a contrast between the corrupt and the righteous. Here is what the corrupt do, and here's what the righteous do. What a difference there is in those two, and that is the psalm. Now I want to shift gears. Knowing the psalm now, we got a general idea of what the psalm is. There's more could be said in analyzing the psalm, analyzing each phrase, analyzing each Hebrew word. But we're not going to do that. We're going to take that general understanding of the psalm, and now I want to go back and talk about the connection. What connection? Let's go back to verse 1. I want you to see that there is a connection between no God and corrupt living. And let's go back to the psalm and see what it says. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none who does good. Now, if you don't get anything else from this study tonight, I hope you see this point, that there is a connection between their saying and thinking and believing there is no God and corrupt living. There is a great connection between the two. It is most obvious that the one who says there is no God, that leads to corrupt living. Now let's just suppose for a moment that here is a person who was born to atheist parents or agnostic parents. And they're raised in this concept, and they have from birth have been told there is no God. And so they believe there is no God. They think there's no God. They're constantly told there is no God. That's all they've ever thought. That's all they've ever believed. There is no God. We're not surprised now that those who hold to that concept, that leads to corrupt living. What do you mean by corrupt living? It's not surprising at all that that person is going to be involved in lying. Why not? He thinks there's no God. If there's no God, there's no moral standard. If there's no God, there's no rules. If there's no God, there's no judgment. So we're not surprised at that. This concept leads to lying. It leads to drunkenness. If he wants to get drunk, why not get drunk? You should begin to point to the scripture. Well, there isn't a God, and that doesn't mean anything to me. And so he does whatever he wants. He believes there is no God, and that leads to things like stealing. If he wants something, he seizes it and takes it. If he wants to commit fornication, if he wants to commit homosexuality, it makes no difference about any of that. He can do whatever he wants because there is no God. I want you to see this. This is obvious. That one who has this concept, there is no God, that leads to corrupt living. That's obvious. There's something else that may be not as obvious. And we'll get to that in just a moment. This is not so much just a denial of the existence of God in this psalm. It would include a rejection of the belief that God matters and that His will is of any importance to man. Look at Psalm 10 and verse 4. You're at Psalm 14. Let's back up a little bit to Psalm 10 and in verse 4. The wicked in his proud countenance does not seek God. It's not the same kind of person of Psalm 14. God is in none of his thoughts. What I want you to see is, in this psalm, it is more than just a denial of saying, I don't believe there is a God. It includes a rejection that God matters in our life. It doesn't matter what God said. It doesn't matter what God is. It doesn't matter what He may have uttered and what He may have said. Now listen to this. The focus of this psalm does not seem to be so much what the fool says as what he does. Go back and read verse 1 again. The wicked has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There are none that does good. The Lord looks down from heaven from the suns upon the children of men to see if any understand and seek God. They've all turned aside. They've altogether become corrupt. There is none that does good, no, not one. They're workers of iniquity, verse 4. The focal point is not so much on what he says, it's on how he lives. Let's go back to verse 1. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. The NET and the New Century say, they say to themselves, there is no God. This is based on the affections of his heart, what he thinks. The psalm is not so much focusing on the advocate of atheism, the one who said, I want you to know there is no God. I want you to believe there is no God. This is what he says to himself. This is what he says in his heart. This is the one that is determined to have his way and live as he wishes. Pulpit observes concerning this verse, it says he has contrived to convince himself of what he so much wishes. I want you to see this connection here. And I want you to follow this carefully because there's a point to be made and probably the main point I want you to see. Charles Simon said the words, there is, that is, the fool has said, there is no God. The words there is not in the original, and may therefore be omitted. The text would then stand thus, the fool has said in his heart, no God. That is, I wish there were none, and how common a wish this is, or is this. And if he be correct in his interpretation of that, and it is, that there is not in the original. So the fool says to himself, no God. Says it to himself. Perhaps Simon is right, that is his wish. That's what he wants. So let's go back to this connection here. The fool has said there is no God, and that leads to corrupt living. It is true, it's obvious that that leads to corrupt living, but it's also perhaps saying in this text that corrupt living leads to the conclusion there is no God. I'll give you some evidence of that is often the case. And so what is the psalm saying? I think it's saying both. It is connecting, saying there is no God is connected to corrupt living. And that quite often, saying there is no God or believing that will lead to corrupt living, but sometimes one who believes there is a God ends up living corruptly, and then they now conclude there is no God because God's in their way. Matthew Poole said, their great and willful wickedness is alleged as a ground of their atheism or infidelity. Have you ever known of someone who believed in God, they believed in the Bible, they may not have been as faithful as they should have been, but they were believers in God and in the Bible, and in time, they kind of drifted away from that, and they finally just throw up their faith and just give up, and they don't even believe there's a God anymore. And in many cases, it's not because they've done deep study and they've come to understand. It's that they got involved in sin. They got involved in this corrupt living we talked about, and they now have come to the conclusion there cannot be a God. Listen to Barnes. He said the idea is that in his apprehension there is no such thing as God, or no such being as God. The more correct idea in the passage is that this was the belief of him who is called a fool, and it's doubtful whether the language would convey the idea of desire. But he goes on to say perhaps that's included. Or of a wish that it might be so. But still there can be no doubt that such is the wish or the desire of the wicked, and that they listen eagerly to any suggestion or argument which in their apprehension would go to demonstrate that there is no such being as God. You see what he's saying? That perhaps this psalm is saying that there is this desire of the wicked that I don't want there to be a God. Barnes goes further. The passage would prove also in its connection that such a belief was closely linked. That's why I was telling you that. It's closely linked. This belief there is no God and corrupt living are closely connected. In fact, they are almost inseparable. Either as the cause or the consequence with a corrupt life. For this statement immediately follows in regard to the character of those who are represented as saying there is no God. It's interesting, there is no God, and then he says they are corrupt. What a close connection they have. As a matter of fact, the belief that there is no God is commonly founded on the desire to lead a wicked life, or the opinion that there is no God is embraced by those who in fact lead such a life, with a desire to sustain themselves in the depravity to avoid the fear of future retribution. See what he said? Quite often that is the case. You've known of that. I have seen that. I've dealt with that, where someone has come to the conclusion, I have to say there is no God. Why do you say that? Because I'm involved in something, and God, if I believe in the Bible, that condemns that, and I don't want to live with that, so now I've just rejected the standard altogether. Maybe you haven't dealt with that. I've dealt with that on multiple occasions, where someone who once believed in God finally rejects God. And why have they rejected God? Because of the desire. That's what they want. They don't want there to be a God. Let me give you a case in point. This name may not mean anything to you. Aldous Huxley, the brother to Julian Huxley. Well-known, world-renowned agnostic, as he would call it. We would call him an atheist. He says, I'm not an atheist, I'm an agnostic. He doesn't believe there is evidence of God. And here is his comment about that. This is testimony from one who says there is no God, or he says there is no evidence of God. He said, I had motives for wanting the world to have meaning, and consequently assumed that it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find satisfying reason for this assumption. The philosopher who finds meaning in the world is concerned exclusively with a problem in pure metaphysics. He is also concerned to prove that there is no valid reason why he personally should not do this, do what he wants to do. For myself, as no doubt for most of my friends, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation from the concern, a certain system of morality. We objected to morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. The supporters of the system claimed that it embodied the meaning, the Christian meaning, they insisted of the world. There is one admirable, simple method of confuting those people and justifying ourselves in our erotic revolt. We would deny that the world had any meaning whatever. If you didn't follow that, what he's saying is that I had to come to the conclusion there is value in having this concept that the world has no meaning, because that gets in the way of what we want to do. So I come to that conclusion. I want this conclusion because we wanted our sexual liberation and do whatever we want to do and be our own God. We don't want to follow some standard somewhere. What he's saying is I want to live corrupt. Therefore, I've come to the conclusion there is no God. And so here's what I want you to see. That quite often, someone gets involved. Maybe it's in lying, and they're lying, and maybe it's the job they have that they feel like I've got to lie to keep this job, and I'll make more money with that, and so they're lying, and they're lying, and they're lying, and they're lying. And that bothers them at first because they know something about God, but how could God deny and tell me that I can't go to heaven just because I'm doing this? Maybe there isn't a God. Maybe his rules are bad. And because of that corrupt living, that leads him to say, you know what, maybe there's not a God at all. The same thing with drunkenness or stealing or fornication or homosexuality. That's in conflict with what God had said. I can't believe God would condemn that. Maybe if God condemned that, maybe then God's unfair. Maybe there's not even a God. And so the corrupt living has led them to the conclusion the Bible is not true, there is no God. And I want to again suggest there have been multiple times when that's been the case in dealing with people. Perhaps you haven't dealt with that. But I've had people say, if God is telling me that I have to submit to this ungodly husband I have, I don't believe God would do that. So if the Bible teaches that, I can't accept that. So therefore that book must not be true. And if that book's not true, maybe there's not even a God. You see, the corrupt living led to this concept, there is no God. They are connected with each other. And so when someone says, I don't believe in God anymore, it very well may be because they're wedded to the corrupt living first. And then they decide there is no God. They are inseparably connected. Let's talk about the lessons we learn from this song that we take home with us. Here's one of the lessons I learned. Let's list these quickly. Our actions are directly related to our belief or our lack of belief. So why does this person do what they do? It's because of what they believe or what they don't believe. So why does this person who claims to be godly go to church all the time? Why do they refuse to lie? And why do they refuse to get drunk? And why do they refuse to steal? And they condemn immorality. Why do they do that? It's because of what they believe. And so why does someone say they don't see anything wrong with homosexuality? They see nothing wrong with adultery, and they see nothing wrong with stealing, and they see nothing wrong with drinking? It's because of what they believe. They are inseparably connected. Here's the second thing I learned. If there is no God, there is no standard or moral code. The fool who said there is no God, they are corrupt. That tells me then, if there's no God, there's no standard, no moral code, no rules at all. If there is no God, there's no condemnation. If there's no God, what you think about me means nothing, because there is no God. You have no basis to condemn me. You have no rule book to condemn me with, because it doesn't exist. There's no God. And if there is no God, there is no judgment day coming. I'm not worried about the future. And if there is no God, we're our own gods and we make our own rules. Listen to me carefully as I suggest that's exactly what some people want. And that's the point I'm driving at. That is, the person looks at it and says, you know what, this would be nice if there were no rules and no moral code and people couldn't condemn me and there's no judgment day and I make up my own rule. That's nice. I like that. That comes with saying there's no God. You know what? Maybe there's not a God. Maybe there's not a God. And thus his atheism is born. Here's something else I learned from this text. One who denies God or anything he says is called in this text a fool. I didn't call him that. That's what the text said. The fool has said, there is no God. And so one comes along and says, the God doesn't exist. He's a fool. And one who looks at what God says and says, that's not true, is a fool. Because he, in essence, is saying, no God. Let's go to verse 4. One writer suggested, and I think he's correct, that prayerlessness is practical atheism. So says Scruggy. Have the workers of iniquity no knowledge who eat at my people as bread, and they do not call on the Lord? I think calling on the Lord involves more than prayer, but it has to do with obedience. But prayer is one of those principles involved in that. So here's one who claims to believe in God. They say they're believers in God, they're Christians, and yet there's prayerlessness. They never turn to God. They never seek after God. They never talk with God. They never pray to God. Prayerlessness is their life. They may not be total atheists, but that is practical atheism, according to verse 4. Here's something else I'm learning from this context. There will be those who do not understand what guides and rules the righteous, what makes you tick. You may have friends in the world that don't really have any religious background, and they may be the agnostic. I don't know if there's a God or not, I don't know, but I don't read that Bible stuff. And they're not going to understand what gives you your drive and what makes you function and why you do what you do. So let's go back to verse 5. There they are in great fear. For God is with the generation of the righteous. You shame the counsel of the poor, but God is their refuge. They're going to ridicule. They're going to hold it in derision. They hold it in contempt. How ridiculous your rules are that you've made up. According to them, they're not going to understand. Don't be surprised if you have a coworker or some family member when you tell them, I can't do that because of the Bible, and they make fun of that. And they say, oh, you're ridiculous. The psalmist said that long ago. They are corrupt. Now go back to verse 6. God is our refuge. Our God is our protection, our shelter, our safety. So our refuge, our protection, our safety is in the Lord. And it's interesting that, well, what do you do when you're under fire and under ridicule? And maybe in times like the season that we're in, there may be family you deal with, and you say, well, we can't do that. We can't drink, and so we're not going to participate in that, or we won't participate in some of the things. And they make fun of you and they ridicule you. What do? Let's look at verse 6 again. You shame the counsel of the poor. But the Lord is our refuge. Your safety, your counsel, your protection, your shelter is in the Lord. And remember, that's where everything is. And run to the Lord instead of worrying about what everybody else may have to say. Now, this is the point we were driving at earlier, and so I want to mention that again as a practical thing. That many times those who question God or question the Bible are driven to that because that's what they wish or that's what they need. And maybe I should put need in quotations. They need there to be no God. They need for the Bible to not be true. They need to be able to take some of the Bible and take it out for it to fit their manner of living. I need that. Because you see, I want to do this. And that doesn't fit with that book. So I've got to twist some of that or take some of it out or deny that it's true or that it's a part of the revelation of God or just reject it altogether. I've got to do that. And so if you don't get any other point, you get this, that many times there are those who question, I wonder if God is true. I wonder if His Bible is inspired. They need that to be the case. They need that to be the case so they can live the lives that they want to live. The one who says there is no God, there is the Psalm 14, essentially repeated in 53, the connection between no God and corrupt living. And then here's some lessons that we learn from that psalm. There may be one or more present this evening who's not a Christian, who's not a child of God. Would you come believing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God? Would you repent of your sins, acknowledge your faith, and be buried in the waters of baptism for the remission of sins? If you're subject in any way, would you come while together we stand and while we sing?